Thank you, Ray, for joining us for another episode of Actual Play Broadcast. Today, we are actually doing an episode of GM's Grimoire. I am joined by my wonderful co-host.
I am the Zemian. That's right.
Uh,
I have ascended from name to title.
t- Title, the one, the only. I think. I hope.
There, so interesting point about that because I mean, we've both looked at doing Twitch off and on, and over like the past year, occasionally I check to see if just Zemian is available, and it hasn't been. Somebody has it. Same thing like years ago when I went to make a Twitter with that name, just Zemian wasn't available. Like, it's just like, who the fuck's out there using my goddamn name?
To just add the and be like, yes.
You're not wrong. Maybe that is the play. Maybe it is just the Zemian.
But today we are going over the GM side, the game master side, storyteller side, whatever the system wants to call it, their side of character creation. Now, you as a GM make a lot of characters. Most of them don't need to have stat sheets. Most of them are NPCs that, let's be honest, your players will interact with once and either remember for the rest of their lives and drag them everywhere despite the fact they were only supposed to talk to them once, or promptly ignore and forget that they existed.
Yeah. Some people might be wondering, well, if I'm not really making characters, not counting NPCs, why the hell am I getting this episode about making characters when that's the player's job? Well,
Well,
it is also kind of your job because sure, you're setting up the campaign, you're making all this other stuff, but you're creating the environment in which the players are going to be playing in. And as part of that, you need to provide the context to the players. You need to provide the tools they will need as players to create these characters. Using tools in a very figurative, more, the information that's going to be relevant to them and things to expect and all that stuff. We talked about this a little bit about picking system, I think. Some very ideas in the same ballpark,
yeah,
but we can get a little more into it today.
and we are. As a GM, your job is going to sometimes feel like you're herding cats. Uh, there is just
Sometimes.
no escaping that.
Well, I guess I can't say sometimes. It is sometimes for me. Typically, I can be like, here's what we're doing, here's the rules, here's the information you need, go. And I typically just get a few questions and that's that. But sometimes I do have to babysit people making characters, which is fine.
Yeah. And typically the way I see it is when you're a GM and the things you're gonna have to be prepared to do as a GM when going through, I recommend doing this in a session 0. Just that way everyone can sit there and communicate with one another what their ideas are rather than, everyone talk to you and then you parrot it back to other people who ask, well, what's everyone else playing at the table? It's easier to just have session 0 so people can have a dialogue if your group like doesn't have the time, doesn't want to, or is just not something that you want to do.
Absolutely.
In your power to
I
not do it.
I can't stress it enough how valuable a session 0 is. Like, not even talking about like just safety tools and stuff like that. We've talked about the safety tools before and why session zeros are valuable and stuff. But so we're not going to rehash
Yeah.
this episode specifically. Why is session 0 valuable? Session 0 is valuable because, man, let me tell you, every time I've had a game and I've not had a session 0 where people can specifically have time set aside to discuss characters among one another, invariably it turns into people having like overlapping concepts or clearly one person has one set of expectations for the game and another person has another set of expectations. Like, it's not that it's not doable or these characters will come into the game and be unplayable or anything like that, but it's a lot more disjointed, and it's just one of those variables can shake the foundation a little bit.
Yeah. Um, but in my experience, and I mean, you can chime in here if you've had other kinds. I typically have two kinds of players at a table. I have the player who knows exactly what they have in mind to build, backstory, and idea of who that character will become. Like they have their genealogy figured out, and it's just like I'm ready to go. Where's the sheet? And then you have people who would have not a singular fucking clue of what they are making, maybe even what they're playing.
I feel like I'm smack dab in the middle of these two things.
Right.
Because I'll come to the character sheet and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm playing yet. Come back to me in a few minutes. And then it goes from like a trickle of information to suddenly a lot of information.
Yeah. You'll especially when working with a new system, you'll get people that are, not a singular clue what they're making because as the GM, you've probably read a good portion of the book. The players, even if you hand them the book in a PDF format, there is a strong likelihood that they have maybe read a quarter, a, f- a fifth of what you have read.
Yeah.
And if you're like, I only
The
skimmed the book, well, imagine what your players did.
yeah, the player who actually sits down and genuinely reads the book before making their character, very rare exception.
Yeah.
Still an exception, not as rare, but the player who reads the book as it pertains to their character, like they sat down, started making their character, and like took the time to at least like read, okay, what are the attributes or characteristics? Like, what are my main stats? Like, what do they do and what do they govern? And then like read, okay, what do my skills do specifically according to this game, rather than just look down the list and be like, oh, that seems straightforward. Um, and then also like, oh, I have to like pick spells or abilities or whatever. Let me go like read how that subsystem works. Even that player is not as common as you would like them to be.
I felt more towards that one.
Yeah, like, and as we've said before, this is going to depend on the dynamic of your group. Maybe for your group, that is okay. Maybe the expectation is, like we've said before, that the GM teaches the game to everybody. And maybe that is just the dynamic. You just help people put their sheets together and you just kind of explain the game as you go. If that's your group's dynamic, that's all fine and dandy. But this is about how the mindset you should have when you're approaching the game, when you're approaching getting people prepared to make characters.
Yeah.
So you got to understand, like, unless you have that type of player who is going to sit down and do the extra reading, they're just going to follow the character creation steps. And that might also come with a lot of questions for you.
Yeah.
So, as part of that, you definitely need to do the reading on how do you make a character. And something I do sometimes, depending on my confidence with the system, is sometimes I will make a character ahead of time. Not like super formally, but just go through the process myself just to see how it works. So I have enough of an understanding where if somebody has a question or something's not clear, I can jump in and help, or at least help look for an answer since I'll know where to look.
The two examples I gave of like the people that come to the table with, you know, full genealogy mapped out down to the individual chromosomes, and people without a fucking clue. These aren't explicitly like good or bad. They have their pros and cons. The people that show up may cling to an idea, and that could become difficult for you like to fit into a story that you're wanting to tell or that you're wanting to present or try to move with. So like if you have fucking David the pirate show up to a game, it's like, no, we're going through a desert. why do you have all these pirate stuff? How'd you get here? What happened? And they're like, yar, yar. It becomes a bit of a problem. However, these people just need help shaping their idea to fit into the campaign generally. If you have like a specific idea in mind, think of them more like as clay to be molded. Whereas the people with no clue are complete blank canvases with no plan, no concept, and no like direct forward idea for their character. But a blank canvas is a blank canvas. You can sit there and like, oh, look at this thing of this is the area of Sussex, and this is the families that live there. One of them used to is alleged to be part of a cult, and players will latch on to shit like that. But in your mind, you're like, I already planned for them to go through here at some point. So you can sit there and start bringing plot points and giving people hooks already into your narrative with those blank canvases. Just a matter of whether or not they bite.
Yeah. I did want to talk a little bit about something that I've been doing, and by extension, you've started dabbling and doing it a bit yourself.
Yeah.
It is definitely, in my opinion, above and beyond what should be expected, at least for, you know, a casual game among friends. Um, but I've been putting together what I refer to as game packs, which branched off of the idea of a mix of things, but in previous games and game lines and such, you'll get like the adventure module or a campaign book or whatever. And in that book, depending on the nature of it, they may have some very specific like character creation options. Sometimes it might mean additional options, sometimes it might mean alterations to how you make a character. For example, in World of Darkness, the guide to the Sabbat book had adjustments to the rules for making characters because they were coming in saying, "Hey, the way Sabbat come up into Unlife is different than how Anarch or Camarilla vampires do. And here are some different rules to reflect that." And how those rules are different also says a lot about this faction and these kinds of characters. And then that combined with a very common thing at the home table is the house rules. And something we've talked to you guys about before is, if you're going to have house rules, be consistent, write them down, have them available, make sure everybody's clear on those house rules and just be consistent about them. So I already consistently had a house rule document, or at least a channel on Discord or whatever it might be where these things are stored. So I decided, well, I take these two ideas and I mash them together, and I have this sort of game pack that contains setting specific lore that's relevant to the players, includes any specific character creation guidelines I want to give the players, and then also a section for the house rules. And I just started doing it in Google Docs. I put in a little extra effort by throwing in some art here and there, and just, making sure things are formatted clearly and things have like headers and stuff. And you don't need, if it's something that sounds interesting to you, you don't have to put a ton of time into it. You don't have to sit there and pick out, oh, what font do I want to use for the titles? How do I want to format the cover page? Blah, blah, blah. You don't have to put all that time into it. And all I do is I sit there and I go, here, setting information is the first chapter, second chapter, character creation, third chapter, house rules. And I make sure in that Google document that everything is showing up properly by using headers and titles and such, that everything is clearly outlined in the bookmarks or, the navigation tab there on the side.
Yeah.
so that players can quickly jump around. I don't expect people to read all of the setting specific lore stuff I put in there, but it is available to them. And, you just sometimes be a little cheeky and they ask a question and be like, well, if you did read the lore packet, you would know.
Yeah.
It's right there. It's the information that is publicly available to you.
Yeah.
Um,
Not. I was about to, jokingly knowledge check your players, but in all
yeah,
honesty, another thing it's good for is, let's say that you have a system that you hold near and dear to your heart, but the rest of your players haven't fucked with it at all.
spoiler alert, this is coming from a very real place for Brandon.
It is. Um, I had made. I've realistically I made several documents for this game so far. Um, but for the Red Markets game, that either an episode or so is out already or will be coming out here soon. I had gone through the lore of the book, found the portions that I needed to have explained to players, because it's like, oh, it's a zombie apocalypse. It's, enough said. Well, no, because it's a supernatural, a more supernatural zombie apocalypse. Uh, and it's fucking wild how some of the parts of the system work. It's based around economic horror. It's by Humanon Games. Check it out. I will shell constantly for this game,
Yeah.
but I made a lore document, and then as part of the session 0, something that had to be done was they players had to make their own enclave. So they had to decide like facets and portions and like where, when, why. All that stuff had to be figured out. And we did, and I had to get it all documented cuz I'm only one man. I cannot obtain and contain that much information. I just can't do it. Notes, I love taking notes. I'm a fucking nerd. I get it. Notes are important. As a GM, take notes. It will save you time, and you won't look like a fool when you ask your player, "What was the king?" I've actually had an experience like that. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I've been guilty of it. I intend to take a note and, train of thought, go somewhere else because I'm in the middle of running a game and the note gets forgotten and then it's not made. And then, a week or 2 weeks later, that piece of information comes up again. And it's just like, anybody happen to write that down?
yeah.
Because I didn't.
It also accentuates like different GM styles, like pure improvisation versus I have planned everything out. I have written a 500-page document of how this is going to go.
To which I say,
Uh,
get help.
uh,
That's too much for me. That's too much.
but you know, taking notes, even if you're like full improvisation, taking notes so you can remember what happened is the part that's important.
Yes.
Um, but there are a couple things to just be mindful of during the character generation process. First and foremost, you want to know the system. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You don't have to be like saintly knowledge of I know everything in this book. I could tell you page for page. I could read it back to you with my eyes closed and a fucking hamster in my ear. No, you just need to be familiar with the aspects of the system like combat, skill checks, and then if they have any subsystems like magic or hacking, because players are going to want to explore those generally.
Yeah,
And
you're going to want to know enough that you can express the general idea of how something works or the ideas behind the system to the players when they ask. Because
yeah,
if you
you
have
don't need
players that are a little bit more experienced with tabletops, they might be like, "Hey, so how do we roll for things?" You need to be able to explain that.
yeah, you don't need to be a savant in those systems. You just need to know how they function.
Yeah.
Like at a ground level, understand how they function. If your players start doing some crazy shit, and you're like, I don't know if you can do that. That's when you're gonna have to probably do some more exploring, more learning. But if everyone's new to the system, you generally don't have to expect that to happen unless a player just accidentally runs themselves into it, which is entertaining in and of itself because they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Um, Additionally, another thing you want to keep in mind is know the kind of direction you're going to push the campaign. This does not mean that I'm telling the story, I want only these kinds of characters. You can run a railroad campaign, but that's like not how I run, and I don't know if I'd want to be a part of it. Having flexibility in your story is a good thing to allow player backstories and their decisions to impact the story that you're all making together.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said of in regards to this, to tell the players what the content and the direction of the game is going to be so that you can avoid certain unfortunate situations. I've probably used this example before on the podcast, but it's also an example I use a lot when I talk to people about GMing. So I may not have and just might be remembering a different occasion I talked about it. But the common example I use is you're playing D&D or Pathfinder or whatever, you don't communicate the intent of the game, and somebody picks a ranger and they decide they want to specialize in killing undead as a ranger. So they, favorite enemy undead or whatever. And then you get in the campaign, and the campaign is about hunting dragons. Kind of feels bad.
Yeah, because I
Or,
mean,
they pick something else, and then the entire campaign is centered around undead. And now the ranger player is like, well, I wish I had known that so I could have made different choices. And so these are the kinds of information you need to be thinking about or what to communicate to the players, because we've come a long way from the ancient days of AD&D and such, where the traditional role of dungeon master was one of opposition to the players, where it was more like a war game in a sense, where you are actively trying to foil your players and your players are actively trying to outsmart you so that they can beat the dungeon. This is a cooperative experience that is both telling a story and playing a game. And you should be, there's this phrase, a fan of your players or a fan of their characters, anyways, in that you want them to succeed and to tell their stories and to tell their arcs. That's not necessarily just don't challenge them, don't make them fail or anything like that, but you want to give them the tools to enable them to be awesome within your story, or to at least fill their role in your story, because let's face it, not every game is about a epic power fantasy about saving the world. Sometimes the story is seeing eldritch horrors beyond human comprehension and just doing your best to cope, and that's the game. But ultimately you want to make sure your players have the tools, and one of these tools is helping them understand what is the game going to be about. What is the content they should be expecting to encounter? You don't need to spoil anything for them, you know? If you're doing an undead apocalypse scenario in your fantasy world, that's not a spoiler.
yeah,
A spoiler would be, well, you see, the Lich is actually Jessica's character's dad. That's a spoiler. The fact that from levels 3 to 20, we're going to be fighting undead is not a spoiler.
no,
You can be upfront and just be like, hey, heads up, this is what's going to happen, guys. I'm not going to tell you how specifically it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. So prepare yourselves for that.
or we're going to be on a boat the majority of the time, out in the open seas. I recommend your character be able to swim.
Yeah. If the game has a swimming skill, have the swim skill. Or if it is just athletics, if you're playing 5th edition or whatever, you know, do what you got to do. Make sure you are not going to drown the moment you do not have a boat under your feet.
Yes, nothing like going to session 0 and then finding out that the character doesn't know how to swim and then having to look up the suffocation and drowning rules. Wild. Wild time. Um, Another thing that you might be prepared to do. Now, I have a caveat to this, and I have a feeling that Zemian's gonna roll his eyes at me, but I'm gonna
Hmm.
put it out there anyway. Be prepared to say no to a concept. Some people can show up with joke concepts. If your table's fine with that, feel free to have them play that.
I'm
Just
not going to
don't
roll my
make
eyes with that.
well, hold on. Just
Okay.
just don't make the
All
joke
right.
all the player has for the concept. My favorite joke concept that I've seen is the Warforged bard named Gender. And the punchline is gender is a social construct. Ha 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 ha. There's the eye roll.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what are they doing? Are they trying to become the first Warforged elected official? Are they on the run from their creator, having been made to entertain and then stored in a shed time and time again, not being treated as a person despite the fact that they are sentient? Joke concepts can be fun and lighthearted, but don't have that be the only dimension to it. Those characters are
Yeah.
shallow, and generally everyone gets bored of them after a few sessions if there's nothing else going on.
Yeah, unless you're playing a total beer and pretzels campaign where the entire point is just literally shenanigans, the campaign, then that's obviously going to be fine. But if you're playing a serious game, the joke character with no substance just gets boring, if not irritating,
Yeah.
after a little bit. And I mean, really, there's a prime example of how to have a kind of not a total joke character, but definitely a character who seems very unserious, who seems like a joke, but actually has backstory. And that's pretty much every character Sam Riegel plays in Critical Role.
Yeah, no shit.
Like, are there other characters we could probably point to? Yeah, but that is like, those are some of the most prolific examples. Um, his character from like any of his characters from any of the Critical Role campaigns, they're all like very joke type concepts on the very surface level, but you look under the hood and it's like, holy shit, there's plot in here. Can
Yeah.
you believe it?
It's also usually tragic. But I
Yeah, of
think
course.
that's just Sam's flair for the dramatic.
Yeah.
Um, but having, there's nothing wrong with the joke character as long as there's substance behind it. The moment someone's like, "Oh, I have brought, Farty McFartson." Okay, what's their deal? He farts a lot. Okay,
Okay.
and that's all I got. Try again. You tell them to take that back and come
Let
back
this
when
be
they have
your
an actual
reminder to
concept.
keep your fetish separate of your characters. Your
Also
characters are
do
not your
that.
fetishes.
Yeah, please do not mix the two. Uh
Especially not if it's Fart McFartson. Definitely
God,
do not mix those things. Yeah. Yeah. It's just
I
not good.
it's not great. It's huh.
No, it never ends
Anyhow,
well. It just makes people uncomfortable. Don't do it. Don't be that guy.
yeah,
In case we haven't been obvious to this point, like, don't be that guy.
yeah, don't be
Don't
that guy.
you know? You get
Um,
ERP at your table. Go off, king, do or queen or whatever. Like live your
you
best
you
life. But
you do you.
if the party is not down for that, don't make it weird. It just you will go down in infamy as that one guy we used to hang out with that played that really weird character and was kind of gross about it, and they'll all be laughing about you and about how weird you were.
Yeah,
So just don't be that guy. But you know, so in addition to this, I think this is a good segue point to talk about you need to be clear with your players and have a clear picture in your head. What is the tone of your game? There's something to say, okay, this is a general, like, we're going on a very adventure fantasy, just very bog standard Dungeons and Dragons type campaign of just the whole thing is go out there, do good, make money while we're at it, go fight monsters, go fight the bad guys, etc., etc. But the tone becomes very different where sure we might be still playing D&D, but for example, let's say, well, maybe I shouldn't go off specific adventures because maybe not everybody is familiar with them. But the difference from that generic adventuring fantasy to as adventurers, where you are in your custom setting or whatever, the typical adventuring contracts aren't available outside of civilians in desperate need, but they barely have any money. And instead, the majority of contracts are mercenary work because where you are in the world is dominated by two empires and they are actively at war now. And they're hiring mercenaries left, right, and center to go perform military action against the opposing side. And as an adventurer, you're technically a mercenary. You're somebody who fights for money. And the tone between that and we go adventure and go fight the bad guys, very different.
Yeah.
Especially if those two empires are neither explicitly good nor explicitly bad. Because that raises a lot of questions for the characters and what do they value, and your tone of the game kind of gets, it could get a little dark, it could get a little gray.
Could get
And so you want
quite
to,
messy.
yeah, you want to make sure the players know, like, hey, here's the tone of the game. This is going to be some of the stuff we're going to be dealing with. This is going to be a story about war for telling them what to expect. Like, we're not going to be going out slaying dragons. This is going to be about, covert action or whatever. Like, however you want to paint it. But it's explicitly going to deal with the struggle of loyalty and fighting for what you believe in and stuff like that. So, tone, I already kind of started talking about it, but theme as well, because that's part of what I was just talking about.
Yeah, and I think like that can be its own conversation. I think I'm wanting to do a talk on like setting at some point. Not necessarily like
Yeah.
creating your own, but interpreting existing settings. And then because creating your own setting is a whole different kit and caboodle. That I'm not I've
I
not
mean,
done a lot of.
we could do an entire podcast on world building as a topic.
Yeah.
Because when you're making a setting, that's what you're doing. You're world building. Unless you're talking about building setting as in like little s setting where I'm playing in this pre-made setting, but I'm picking this like little corner that I'm going to take as my own and I'm going to flesh it out. And like it's here in this bigger thing where I don't have
Yeah.
to build an entire world. I can build this small setting within an established world.
Like for example, D&D 5th, you have Faerun. Okay, well Faerun's massive. It's an entire fucking world. Well, what kind of adventure are you wanting to tell? I could tell you what kind of adventure you could really run in Waterdeep. A lot of political intrigue can happen there. Or a lot of criminal shit. You're fucking it's you can change the setting dial in parts of already established settings depending on what parts you want to focus in on. Do the same thing with Eclipse Phase. for people that were listening to our Eclipse Phase game, I had it a very open sandboxy for folks to be like, this is what I want to, this is what I'm gravitating towards, this is what I want to do. And then when everything was said and done, where do people want to go? And then we just go from there. It's
Yeah.
with larger already established settings, it's typically easy to, I say typically, it's not always the case. It's typically easy to find areas of intrigue and go, what's that intrigue about? That's what I want to focus on. And then you can invoke those elements.
And I will say this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it is related. I want to say that is the power of like the game pack, because as we were talking, it just had me thinking like game pack stuff reminded me like jump starts are a thing that some companies do for their games, where
Yeah.
they have like a pre-made adventurer and there's e- typically like pre-made characters and a little bit of setting information and just the bare bones information on the rules, and typically like a quick reference sheet or two or something like that. And they're, depending on who you're going to and what it's for and stuff, a variable value, quite frankly. I would like to say typically they are valuable, but if you're not somebody who likes to run pre-made adventures, well, obviously you're probably going to value it less. But as valuable as they are in how they kind of present what they feel is important to the game and the setting, I think the advantage of making your own game pack to make the players is presumably you're making this game pack after going through the book, reading the setting if it's something with a predefined setting, because you're not going to sit there and regurgitate everything out of the book. You're going to sit there and you're going to pick through what is important to what you feel is important to the game that you're going to be running, what is going to be important to the characters that are going to be existing in this game world, and putting that in a game pack. So in a way, you are kind of creating your own jumpstart just without the pre-made adventure and some of the extra stuff. You're just creating this jumping off point of like, this is what I believe is important for us. Please take a look at this. You don't need to memorize it all, but you should at least skim through all this. And that's one of the things I find very valuable in the game pack, because it's one thing to tell somebody, "Hey, go read this section out of the book." But oftentimes players come back and might be like, so what are we going to be doing in the game? Because as much as a game might try to tell you what it's about and what it's doing, in my experience, I just feel like as good as they may sell it, it's somehow never enough. When I was talking about running Aberrant, I still invariably ended up having conversations about, well, we're going to be playing Terrigen. What does it mean to be Terrigen? Even though the book talks about that. Or when I'm running Vampire, or I'm a player in Vampire and another new player is like, so what do we do? And even though the book talks about that, it's not entirely clear. And just having to sit down and be like, look, short version, trust nobody. There's going to be a lot of politics. And no, that doesn't mean real world politics. It means the social maneuvering and making deals, alliances and rivalries constantly shifting, arguments over territory and domain and rights to feeding, the trading of boons and other resources, these kinds of politics. And just kind of laying things out in simple terms for people. So I'm not saying you should go out or that you must go out and create a game pack for all of your games, but I find it very valuable because you get to essentially put out your own authorial intent and authorial idea of what this game is, so you can better communicate that to the players, so they can read the book, but they can also read what you've written and understand, like, okay, so this is kind of how things are going to be.
Yeah. Again, you're doing this with the understanding that potentially a number of the players won't read it.
Yeah.
But again, you should understand when running a game, there's potential that some players will barely read the handbook that you give them to make a character.
Yeah.
Um,
But that is the upside is uh, they're more likely to read it because like I said, you're not regurgitating the book at them. You're
yeah,
picking out pieces of information. If you turn around and you make a game pack and it's 50 pages, they're not going to read it. They're just not. They're going to read only what is required of them to read because it's too long. I'm not going to give you a hard page limit on how much there should be, but the information that is inside should be relatively short, to the point, easy to understand. It is not absolutely expounding on everything in every fine detail. You want to give them something light that is easy for them to approach and be like, okay, I've got like 11 pages of like setting information, and it's not 11 pages of 11,000 years of history. No, don't do that. Be like, here's the brief outline if you really want to have a history section. But the idea is if it's 11 pages, some of that's being eaten up by formatting and breaking of paragraphs and stuff like that. But you're having sections of information on different topics relating to the setting that's important.
yeah, have it easy to read and easy to reference
Yes.
when structuring it.
Yeah. Because at the very
Um,
least, even if they don't read the whole thing, but they're sitting there, they look at the character creation rules. Maybe they sit there and scroll through it, just kind of not really reading it, but just looking for things that might catch their eye. And they might find a couple things that be like, that sounds cool. I think I want to have my character involved with that thing or attached to that thing in some way because that sounds interesting.
yeah, treat it like a bit. If you're familiar with the concept of splat books, splat books are quick, sometimes dirty, depending on the company. But it presents what you need to know for this area and if there are any additional options.
Onyx Path over here just unzips, whaps a fat splat on the table.
Why is it 300 pages? Because you wanted it all.
Well, it's a
Uh,
new character type and it technically needs a whole host of fucking rules and charms
yeah.
and lore.
But on top of that, another thing that you need to be prepared for as GM during character creation is you need to be ready to pitch ideas to your players about what they could play. Don't give them full concepts like Orc Van Helsing, who was out to avenge the death of his daughter by the hands of a vampire lord. No, give ideas like, "Oh, how about you play a ranger of some sort?" Or help pitch ideas of like for backstory, point to locations on the map that maybe you are planning or wanting them to explore, and then give background and lore to certain parts of the map. That way players can usually pull something from that.
Yeah, don't pitch ideas that are explicitly like to be like mean. As in, if you know this campaign is not going to feature undead, don't pitch playing a ranger specialized in hunting undead to a player. That's kind of mean.
Points to golden rule, don't be a dick.
Yeah. But more to the point, when you're going to pitch concepts to people, explicitly pitch things that are going to be tied into the story you're looking to tell. This is a way for you to quietly communicate the direction the game is going without spoiling things, or to quietly be like, this is, or even to give an example, not quietly, of this is the kind of character I'm looking for. If you're looking to tell a more dark and tragic story, the example character or the suggestion you make to a player should be a character that is flawed in some way, and that should be a focus. And they should be tragically flawed. Maybe they have already had some tragedy in their backstory. Now, you don't need to write the whole backstory for them when you pitch an idea, but if the whole thing is to pitch a tragic character, there should be a kernel of whatever that tragedy there is in there because that's what's important to the character for the context of this game.
And being aware of your player's tastes is also important. Uh, this person in our group listens to our content. Hi. Uh, consistently
You
makes
know what you are.
spellcasters. Yeah, you know exactly who you are. There's a few of you that do it, but one of you is the repeat offender. Really enjoys spellcasting. So if you are pulling up a system and you're like, the system has magic, you need to do one of two things. You either need to be aware of what magic does to a better degree. That way you can be like, oh yeah, this is what you do for that. Or be prepared to be like, hey, here's all the magic options to save you some time hunting and pecking, and it's not all stored in one area, like some books tend to do sometimes.
Yeah. Layout truly is a lost art.
It really is. It really is. But knowing what your players like to play is helpful because it allows you to kind of get around the idea. Like if some of your players are like, I don't know what I want to play, but you already know what they usually play, you either point them in the direction of the thing that they usually play, or sometimes they'll say, well, you suggested it, so no. Because we have another player like that. I say it with love, but goddamn. Uh, where because like it for them it's part of the joke. So and being able to at that point like, hey, like here's this thing. They'll sit there and push against that, but because they're pushing against that, they start actually picking other things. So you're still making progress.
Yeah, eliminating choices is in the same way narrowing down choices. Instead of saying, well, what kind of things do you like to play? They're like, well, what do you not like to play? And if they
Yeah.
still won't give you a good answer, then yeah, you can employ that technique of like, well, why don't you try playing this? Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, that's off the table. Next thing. And
Yeah.
just, get on the list. It's a lot like trying to discuss with your family or significant other or friends or whatever where you want to go eat, where you want to go have dinner or whatever. Sometimes you have to go by process of elimination.
We're going to Wendy's. For anyone who's seen that skit.
This reminds me
Uh
of my saying of you don't go to Denny's, you end up at Denny's.
God, I don't want to go to Denny's. Keep me away from
Even
there.
then, I would not choose to go to Denny's. I'd rather just go home. I'm sure there are people who are feeling personally attacked, but too bad.
They're out there. But something that's important to keep in mind is this is all a collaborative effort at the end of the day. So even if you don't have the session zero, even if you don't have a document written up of what everyone should expect, the new lore, any rule changes, communication's still important. It's still the foundation of what you're doing as the game master and realistically as a person. Everyone should at least attempt to communicate Being good at it and doing it are two separate things. Let me throw that
Absolutely.
out there. Uh, and being able to communicate with your players is like, hey, where are you at on this? Do you need help with anything? Are you trying to figure something out? Especially if you have a player that is, non-communicado for an extended period of time where you're like, hey, just checking in. Game's Sunday. It's Friday. Where are you at? And sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, I've not had the time. I haven't figured anything out." You need to work with that player. It's like, "All right, well, what do we need to do to get this done by Sunday? What parts are you struggling with?" Like you become a problem solver. Now, what their problem is and what needs to be done are two different things. And if the player's just like, "I can't I'm at like a block. I don't have an idea of what I'm going to make." You're going to have to start being firm. Now, I don't want to say assertive or harsh, but firm with, well, we need to figure it out. So let's work together on that. Let's see what we can get done. It's still collaborative, but you're gonna have to be a little more pushy on making sure it gets done in a timely manner. Setting deadlines is a good way to do that. If you're not doing a session zero and wanting everyone to have characters done, even if you are having a session zero and you have some players who are like, I just need to finalize like a couple of things, still a good idea to set a deadline. That way, if they don't respond to the deadline, you can sit there and check on them and say, "Hey, where's this at?" And they can
Yeah,
hand you.
like
It's like, "Oh, it's done. It's right here." Or they'll be like, "Oh, I'm just trying to figure out gear."
yeah. Like real talk, this is one of those instances where being a game master is a lot like being a babysitter or even sometimes what feels like the only adult in the room because chances are you're going to have players who for one reason or another it's going to be like herding cats. You're going to have to wrangle them. You might have to hold their feet to the fire a little bit to get them to do stuff. That's one of the reasons why session zero is a good idea because you're corralling everybody at a specific time and place to come do the thing, and the time has been set aside for them to do the thing. Come, be ready to make characters. If for whatever reason you're playing a system that character creation, or honestly, if your session zero just doesn't end in everybody having characters done, then yeah, as Brandon said, deadline. I strongly recommend enforcing a deadline unless you really trust your players to have that stuff done in time. But realistically, in my opinion, you give a deadline in such a way that you have enough time to review what they have made and have shown to you. You can review it, double check if there are any issues you have, and then have time to get back to them and say, hey, I have an issue with this, this, and this, and this, or I need clarification on this, or whatever the case may be, and allow for time for those changes to be made. And that might mean having to work with them one on one again before session one. And honestly, I have had times where I've sat down and I said, look, we're not ready to start the game. Stuff for characters is not in a place where we're ready to start. We're going to have another session zero effectively where people are going to have time to work on characters and stuff. And so I've had a couple campaigns now where we've had actually multiple session zeros just because that's how things worked out. Um, but, you know, I still strongly recommend at the very least deadline ahead of time so you can review so you don't have people turning in their character sheet literally an hour before the session and you just kind of glancing over it and saying fuck it, and then you get into the game and you discover through gameplay that there's problems with their sheet.
Yeah.
It's just in nature of the beast when it comes to being a game master. That's why I call it auditing sheets, because I sit there and I take my time to make sure things look correct, make sure to the best of my ability without spending an inordinate amount of time on it, but checking them the best of my ability to make sure like the character is built correctly, as in it follows the rules of the game, the steps were followed properly, everything is as it should be. And also making sure that the character fits within the context of the game, fits within the context of the world. You know, if you're playing like, I don't know, let's say a World of Darkness game, and your player comes to you, their character is apparently this guy who has a lot of money. He's a vampire. He has a lot of money. He has money invested in all of these different areas. You know, he's got this like really diversified portfolio that is in another name and it's being siphoned into his accounts and all this stuff. And then he hands you his sheet and there is no dots of finance on his sheet. You should absolutely turn to that guy and be like, "So how did you really get all this money? Are you like a trust fund kid or something?" And they're like, "No, no, no. He's just, really good business sense." Okay, why do you have no dots of finance? If you're going to do this, you need to have dots in finance, because as soon as like I need you to make a roll for like managing this stuff or expanding this stuff or anything like that, you're actually incompetent.
Yeah, you're cooked.
Yeah, you're going to blow through all your money. You're going to make poor decisions. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mismanage it. And you're not going to grow your resources. And depending on your character, that could be mean death for them potentially. But so you want to make sure like that they're making good decisions for their character. And that's not to say that they're dumb for making that kind of mistake or something, but there are genuinely times where players make these kinds of decisions because they just don't think about something in a certain particular way. They may not consider like why this one skill would actually be really important for you to have. And so sometimes they do need that extra set of eyes to look over the character sheet from the game master who is familiar with the setting, familiar with the world, and say, "Hey, I noticed you don't have this, or you have very little of this. Are you aware that like this is important?" You know, for example, say, somebody's playing a wizard and they don't have Arcana. You might want to pull them aside and be like, "I noticed you don't have any proficiency in Arcana. That's very valuable for a wizard to have. Some might even say necessary. Did you not understand what that's used for? Or are you not taking it for a specific character reason? Or what?" And it's up to you if it's okay for them to like not take it for a character reason or whatever, depending on the context of the situation. But this is definitely why I advise make sure you give yourself enough time to look over these sheets. You don't need to spend hours poring over each sheet, but you want to make sure you have enough time where you can look at them and come back to the player and have a conversation and them have time to make changes. So you're not scrambling at the last minute, because if you're listening to this, this might be the first game you're running. Or at the very least, you're still new enough that you feel like, hey, maybe this might be elucidating. Or maybe you're a seasoned veteran and are like hoping for nuggets of new revelation, which understandable. Hello. Hi, friend.
Yeah.
um, I know your pain. But chances are you're probably going to have anxieties over a first session. I know I always have anxieties over a first session of a new campaign. Doesn't matter how many campaigns I run, there's always that nugget of anxiety because first session sometimes really sets the tone and the pace of the game sometimes. Typically it doesn't. You kind of, if you dig yourself into a hole in session one, you can generally dig your way out. It's not that serious. But it feels very serious, and I know especially a lot of people in the hobby are varying levels of totally not neurodivergent people and neurodivergent people. And I know a lot of us have a tendency to get really anxious, overthink these things. And the last thing we need is that extra layer of having to rush to get characters done before session one. Give yourself plenty of time to go through this process with everybody, be it with a deadline after a session zero or taking additional session zeros if you feel it's necessary, or if you decide, fuck it, we ball, just give everybody a deadline and be like, hey, we don't need to have a session zero. Here's what you need to know. Have your sheets, turned in, however many days before the session you feel like you need to make sure you have the time to look them over. That's my pro gamer advice.
Yeah, doing an audit isn't, a bad idea. It's one of the things that I don't do that I probably should. Uh, but I mean, it's my mistake to make.
Yeah, and
And
it's not something that's the end of the world if you don't do it, because worst case scenario, somebody makes a decision and it comes up later, and either they realize they don't have something that they absolutely should have, or they made a mistake making their character, and that just means you have to deal with that problem now instead of ahead of time, which
yeah,
might be a little bit of a headache
which
because you
might
might
be,
have to stop play depending on how serious it is.
yeah, depending on how bad it is. Uh, that being said, like we've also talked in player portfolio that, when a player makes like I'm gonna make a mage, know how to cast. Just because like we recommend it, be prepared to have to teach someone is just like, oh, I'm gonna play a wizard. Do you know how to cast spells? Do you know how to do the wizard things? And they're gonna be like, no, I was hoping you'd show me. Be prepared for that.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Not my call to make. I would say no. I would hope that the player would be wise enough to look up that information on their own to get an answer. But
Yeah, and I think a very important aspect of this to talk about, which I was thinking about this week because I was reminded of it because I re-encountered an XKCD comic. I can't remember the everything the comic said, but the idea behind it is pretty clear. And this is relevant for knowing your players. Understand your players' level of experience with tabletop RPGs. For example, I recently have had the very interesting experience of getting to talk with somebody whose entire tabletop experience up until this point has been only fifth edition and has been wanting to explore games outside of fifth, but his play group will only play fifth. And it's taken him
oof.
being invited to a game of World of Darkness to into Vampire to go beyond that. And so he's had questions of like, well, what is the game like? What should I expect? And I say this because the idea is if you're somebody who is more experienced, but you know your player is not, maybe your player even has no tabletop experience, you need to very specifically think about in your mind how to communicate things to this person because what you would consider baseline knowledge, things that you would consider, oh, well, yeah, everybody like understands this, or like, yeah, this is pretty clear. No, it's not. When you've been in a certain knowledge base for so long, or you have absorbed so much knowledge in an area, your perception of what is baseline becomes skewed. There there is essentially a degree of bias that happens of like, oh, well, yeah, of course. When I say, trying to think of a good example. Of course, when I say, a critical always passes, everybody knows what that means. No, everybody does not know what that means. Even though it seems like a straightforward piece of information for even people that only play 5th edition. They'll take that to mean, yeah, natural 20 always succeeds. But then there's an entire section of people that is like, well, always succeeds as in always succeeds skill checks, always succeeds saving throws, or just always succeeds? How do you rule it at your table? Not everybody knows to ask that question.
Yeah.
But not everybody knows what you mean by crit is a natural 20 on the die if you're talking about 5th edition. Well, what if you're not talking about 5th edition? Now not everybody knows. What if they've never played a tabletop RPG? Well, now they absolutely have no idea what you're fucking talking about, other than I guess there's some kind of thing that you need to pass? What does that mean? Um it Another example is like when I was teaching one of my siblings to play Magic the Gathering for the first time and explaining tapping cards to him, and he processed that as literally like, even though I sat there and I showed him to turn the card sideways, he would just tap the card with his finger. And then he would turn it sideways. After I'd be like, what do we got to do? And then he's like, oh, all right, all right. And he turns it sideways. So when you have players who are newer to the game, don't talk to them like they're idiots. Obviously, goes back to rule number 1: don't be a dick. But go in consciously thinking about, I need to make sure I am explaining things at a very beginner level. I need to assume that specific terminology may mean nothing to this person. So I might need to explain things that I take for granted. There's a lot of conversations that happen about like how vocabulary really shapes our understanding of things, and that seems like such a no duh concept. Like, yeah, obviously, like words help us explain things. Duh. But we see this in tabletop RPGs all the time. We create a specific term to relate to a specific mechanic. And then that term becomes shorthand for that mechanic. For example, dirty 20 versus natural 20. It's a type of shorthand, a type of vocabulary that has been created. Instead of explaining, I rolled a 20-sided die and the die is showing a 20, we say, I have a nat 20. Instead of saying I rolled a d20 and with all of my bonuses added in, I have a 20, we say it's a dirty 20. But nat 20 and dirty 20 doesn't mean anything to somebody outside of this circle until now. They might be able to use context clues and figure out what a nat 20 is, but a dirty 20 is going to be a bit obscure until they understand the concept of, oh, there is such a thing as a natural 20. Knowing that, I can help decipher what a dirty 20 is. But that's context clues. And if they have no context, they can't even do that. So when it comes to things like this, you need to keep in mind, what is the vocabulary you're using when you're explaining things to people, and understand, like, maybe don't use the proper nouns or whatever it might be that the mechanics use to explain things. Because that's actually a complaint that happens in some games now, where there's an excessive use of game terms to explain mechanics to the point where the mechanics actually become difficult to understand because they'll be explaining how you do something and then they reference five different game terms. And now you have to, like a dictionary, effectively flip through the game book to find the definitions of five different game terms and hope, hope to whatever God dictates the design of RPGs that they did not put more game terms in the definitions of these game terms so that you can go back to that passage and actually understand what the fuck it says.
You like Harn, don't you?
Harness cute. It amuses me. I wouldn't put it in a top 10 list of RPGs, but I would
Fair.
have put it in a top 10 list of excellently world built RPGs.
It- It's excruciating detail.
It is a work of art that is not necessarily playable for the majority of tables.
I love it. Um, but like a thing
I
to
know I
keep
got a
in
little high
mind.
concept there, but I felt like it was necessary to really kind of sell the
Drive a point
point.
home. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like again, this is a collaborative. This is A collaborative, B a game. So if you're like, man, I can't devote this much fucking time to wrangling these jackasses that I'm playing with, welcome to being a GM. That's the first lesson you learn is there's only so much time and plenty of jackass to go around.
Yeah. Especially as an
Um,
adult.
oh yeah.
Find me a GM that's not time poor. I challenge you.
A trust fund baby.
Implying they actually run games.
Fair.
Like, I don't know. Maybe there is one or two out there or something, you know? I'm not going to say never or that's impossible. Just the stereotypical trust fund baby is not somebody I would fit in my mind palace of somebody who even plays tabletop RPGs, to be honest. I think too many of them are probably too busy flexing their wealth on social media, trying to convince everybody else that they're important so that they can feel better about themselves.
Point.
I might have been a
uh
little too hostile for what this podcast is about.
yeah, it happens. It's fine. Um eat the rich is all I'm saying. But
Finally, some good fucking food.
yeah, no well, probably a little fatty. Um
Adds to the flavor, baby.
that's the lordy. It's a collaborative game, and the idea behind it is like you're doing this with your friends and family. You can be doing this with total strangers. That's perfectly possible, but don't treat it as don't become too invested that you burn yourself out before you even start with worrying about I need to have this, I need to know this. No, a casual understanding of most things is good enough. That's all you'll need to get past character creation. Once you get into the meat and potatoes of the game, that's where that gets a little more intense. But at that point, it should become a self sustaining fuel. I have this wizard in my party, they're really strong, and I want to do a wizard duel thing because I want to fuck around with the magic system too and see if I can get them out of their comfort zone. I'm gonna go learn the magic system. Oh, there's a bunch of these really cool spells and like really cool abilities that you can do with magic. I'm gonna fuck around with that. And like the idea behind it is, you know, if you're playing the game and you're having fun, the game should drive you to want to learn more about the game, either from a lore perspective or like if you want to know more about the world, or if you want to know more about, certain systems and subsystems in the game. How do these function? How do I mess with these? What do I do? You can start diving in deeper. Some systems will dramatically reward you for doing that in either great, like, just story content and stories that you can use on or with your players, or by allowing you to pull out, you know, everyone in your game has a knife, you pull out a gun. If he's just like, "Aha, you've all done this, but I play my Uno reverse card." And now you've made a challenge for the players, and that can be a lot of fun and entertaining, especially if, like, your players have been just rolling through certain encounters. You can sit there, find a way to shake it up. It's and that drives the players to learn more about, okay, well, how do I work with this? It's a fake arms race where you drive each other to learn more about the system and what the system can do. And who knows, maybe after doing that for a couple months, one of your players walks up and is like, I kind of want to run this. Would you be right if I took one of the Sundays to run a game? And all of a sudden you're a player.
That's right. This episode, it's all about how to trick your players into becoming game masters.
That's what this entire series is.
It's all about brain hacking them. Yes. I did actually want to add though, because what you're saying kind of brought it back to memory that I wanted to bring it up. Um, Something to help relieve a little like pressure from you and the players. Not make decisions at the beginning feel like huge commitments, especially if you're planning to run a longer game. Straight up tell your players, like, hey, we're all like varying levels of new, or if just the players are new in your experience, be like, either way, just say, hey, since there's varying levels of experience here, or we're all new, or whatever it may be, make your characters, don't sweat it too much. We're going to get into the game and we're just going to explore it together. If we hit issues or snags and stuff, or the character you're playing doesn't feel right or whatever, the beginning of the campaign is going to have a grace period of you're free to kind of make changes within the rules of like character creation and stuff. Or if you want to completely swap your character out, that's fine. Just if you're going to make changes or swap your character, communicate that, talk with me. We'll work together and hammer that out. Because you don't want to say, hey, you can make changes and then let them do it without being observed or aware of what they're doing. Not saying that they're going to cheat, just that potentially creates an environment where people think they can get away with things sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, you want to know what your players have got going on in their sheets. Realistically, you should have a general access to their sheets one way or another so that you can check them whenever you want to. We've said this before. If a player is refusing you access to their sheet, that player probably needs to just be kicked from your group. Because as a game master, you have every right to view their character sheet. Every story that I have read where a player has refused a GM access to their sheet has been a horror story. Like literally stories where this player has been disruptive to the table, disrespectful to other people at the table, and has just been a problem. Don't abide by that. But, give yourself that grace period, because you might sit there and be like, you're learning the system. And if you're learning the system, maybe when you're helping people make characters, maybe a misunderstanding you had impacted decisions they made. And so that gives you permission to be like, in the session, be like, yeah, I misunderstood that. If you guys want to make changes, we can do that. We can like pause here, or we can do it at the end of the session, or what have you. Because, like we've been saying, this is a cooperative experience. You're working in collaborative experience. You're working together. It doesn't need to be this very strict, stringent, you have to be locked in by session one. And if you're planning to have this kind of grace period for people to make changes, if it's going to be things like where they can completely swap their character out for a new character, maybe plan your initial adventure to be a little bit more, not necessarily self contained, but smaller in scope. and have it set up where it's a little bit easier for a character to leave and another character to come in. You know, don't have your first session to be, and you are all locked in prison with no way in, no way out, and there's nobody else in sight, and it's been like this for 2 weeks. Like, don't put your players in a box if you're going to do that kind of thing. So that way, you give yourself some permission and the players some permission to experiment a little bit and feel things out. Obviously, this should not extend indefinitely. Like, obviously, there's a threshold of, you're 30 sessions in and somebody's like, look, I'm just not feeling this character anymore. I'd like to change characters. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Um, when I say this, I'm more warning about somebody who is like 5 sessions in, change a character. Another 5 sessions later, changes character. Another 5 sessions later, changes character. And it's like they're constantly changing characters or asking to make changes to their sheet. If it's constant, you gotta put the foot down. Same thing for people who are asking for like very specific changes to the rules that would benefit them.
They're fishing.
Yeah. Be like, no. We gotta there's a degree of somebody making a suggestion because they think it works, things work better, and makes the play experience better. And if you agree with that, then cool. But then there's the, well, I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, and you listen to single thing they say, and suddenly they're the most powerful player at the table. Huh. Interesting how that works. So be mindful, but that also, as everything else, goes along with, don't be a dick and make sure your players aren't being dicks.
That's always
That's
an
what I got
important
to
thing
say
to
about that.
watch out for, yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, if you're playing with randoms. I feel like it goes without saying, but they're, as our token commentary on if you are bringing randoms to your table online, because I know we have talked about utilizing online resources to bring a group together. If you are bringing randoms in, session 0 is a must on top of additional steps, in my opinion. At the very least, bare minimum, you should have a session 0 to see personality wise how everybody jives together. And you also need to be willing to accept that some people may be putting on a friendly face for the first couple sessions and their real nature will begin to show a little ways in. Additionally, if you're recruiting people before you have your session 0, quite honestly, before you say somebody has a seat at the table, you should be in some way or another checking to see if this person's going to be a fit. Depending on the system you're running, it is very easy to put somebody who, it's very easy just to fill seats depending on what system you're running. If you put a free to play 5th edition game out on Roll20 or on Reddit or whatever, your inbox is going to get full of people interested. So, and even some of the more obscure games, you could get a lot of people interested very quickly. I've seen people talk about how they've had over 100 replies within an hour type stuff. So, my strong recommendation is you, like through Google Forms or whatever your preferred method is, develop a type of questionnaire or survey of some kind to kind of get what you feel are the important questions and get the important details out of a potential player and potentially what kind of character concepts they're thinking of to see if like they're actually going to jive with things. There's a lot of different strategies to this. I'm not going to get into it because quite frankly, I don't deal with it. I don't have a ton of experience with it. I know basic things and I don't know. Maybe we might want to talk about that, Brandon, and decide if we want to do an episode about that because I don't think this is really the place to go into all those details.
No.
Um, but there are resources out there for GMs who are going to go look for people online for the first time. Um, I would highly recommend, like, really Google search. Like, you will find stuff. There's a lot of common practices of the kinds of questions you should be asking in surveys and things to look for that are red flags and stuff. So I'm not going to go super into it right now. Maybe we'll revisit the topic at a later time, but I know neither Brandon and I have a ton of experience doing it. I have been on the player side of that, but I have never run a game for randoms. Um,
I technically have, but I gathered them all in person because of
yeah,
me running a club for it in college, where
yeah,
like who wanted to get into the hobby wanted to know more. I have a couple of stories from that, but
yeah.
um
So
yeah,
maybe we'll do that as an episode, and we
that'll
can
be its own
recount
thing.
some of those and stuff. But yeah, if you are doing an online group, I would consider that as part of this helping prepare with characters and stuff because a lot of people do that where they will be like, "Hey, what are the character concepts you're thinking of?" And that can help you weed out people because if you say, "Hey, we're going to be playing, Call of Cthulhu and we're going to be doing this in this location at this year or whatever, like these are the details of the game," and somebody comes at you with like, "Cool, I'm going to come in playing I don't know, Squeaker McSqueakerskin, the party clown, who is literally a guy in a clown costume and just tells really bad jokes and can do balloon animals." I don't think he read what the campaign was about.
Yeah,
Very easy to say, okay, this guy is not sitting at my table. Next application. So, something to think about.
but in terms of character creation, I think we've covered most of the points. Most of the points I wanted to go over at the very least. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just reestablishing, make sure when you're helping your players, like, I generally don't recommend leaving the players completely to their own devices. You should be involved and you should be actively looking for ways to integrate those characters into the story you're trying to tell. Because that is a big difference for players to feel like they're involved versus they are passengers on a train. Even if you're not
Yeah,
actively railroading them, if the plot doesn't really directly involve them and they're just kind of along for the adventure, there's going to be this sense of disconnect. So when you're working with them, be trying to find ways to integrate them into the story by either giving them hooks for things you're planning to have happen and like finding ways to tie their backstories into things, or by looking at their backstories and what they created and saying, "Cool, these are interesting. I'm going to find ways to like make connections to things going on without explicitly prompting the players." Which can be a mixed bag because if your players, there needs to be a degree of trust from the players when you're doing that kind of thing to like trust you to kind of fill in the blanks on backstories. Because I know some players get a little, they get a little crazy about
mhm,
what you can and can't do involving their backstory, even if it's just like an NPC in their backstory. They might get a little territorial and be like, I don't know, my character's grandfather would never do that. He was a good man, blah, blah, blah. Like, and they're having this freak out of character. And, maybe that was the whole point is that you as a GM were going to do this thing where it's like, well, that's what your character is supposed to think. But, you know, maybe it is more interesting this way. So have that conversation of like, hey, are people cool if I, make connections with backstories or do this or do that? good players will gladly hand you the rope that you're going to hang them with.
Oh, absolutely. I love doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be my final piece of parting advice is be actively doing that when you're on the backstory portion. It is kind of like a based off of our other discussions, kind of a given, but I think it's worth reiterating.
It's definitely a backstories can be a mixed bag, um, especially when if you have players, because there are players out there that's like, oh, I have my entire genealogy figured out, and you're not touching it. In which case, that's not how this works. And then you have those players is just like, I am Frank from Pittsburgh. There's not a Pittsburgh in Faerun. I'm Frank from Faerun's Pittsburgh. Okay. What did Frank do before he became an adventurer? Nothing. Okay.
He was
Well,
neat.
but why did he become an
I thought
adventurer?
I thought he was from
Money.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, is fucking there are players who show up with nothing um
Yeah.
for a backstory, and that can be kind of, in my personal opinion, be kind of aggravating because
Oh yeah, I find it totally lame. It's like I thought you wanted a role play.
yeah, it's just like I have made John Halo from the Halo franchise, and he has seen all of the Halo rings and done all of the things. What has he done? All of the things. That's not an answer.
Oh, my favorite backstory. It was not in a game I was running. It was a game I was playing in. Favorite backstory was a character who was a level 20 character from another campaign who effectively was isekai'd into this campaign, and was obviously like leveled down to level 1. And it was like, so they kind of had like this knowledge of how things work and stuff like that, but none of the level progression to like do anything really. But it was just this really like shitty way to just metagame essentially. And I just remember sitting there just being like, why? Like what's the fun in that? So you're gonna like take a character, like a very accomplished character from another campaign, and you're just gonna like try to shove them into another game, kind of like ruin their happy ending in a way, and then do this so you can have some kind of weird sense of power as a player because you can metagame knowledge that really your character shouldn't have, because you should be playing a character that doesn't have all of this experience. Like it such a weird annoying thing.
Yeah. It has problems attached to it. Uh if if you're continuing a campaign, that's one thing. And if everyone's just like, "Oh yes, I am playing my same character," or "I wanted to play a different character, but I wanted to still play with, be part of the second adventure." I mean, sure, I guess. Typically, the way I see follow-up campaigns done when involving the same characters, I've seen it typically be like, "Oh, these are like their kids or family members who's following in their footsteps or is, trying to figure out why they did X or understand their position."
Yeah, that's a big question, is if you want to do generational storytelling or if you're just advancing the timeline in your world and people are making characters separate of those characters.
Yeah.
Because I
Both
think
options are
generational
fine.
storytelling can be cool. Just, there is that question you need to ask yourself of, am I wanting to put up with the baggage of having to role play everybody's characters from last campaign?
Yeah.
Which, in case it's not clear, that can be fraught with issues of potentially players not being satisfied with how you're role playing their past characters. Now, in an ideal world, that wouldn't be an issue because you spent an entire campaign with those characters. You should probably have a solid grasp on who they are and why do they do what they do when they do it. And that should be able to inform you how to role play them correctly. But, you know, not everybody has the same sense for characters to such a degree, so some people might struggle with that. If you think that's a little daunting or you're not sure if you're up for that, you don't have to do a generational thing, but just advance the timeline and people come in with a fresh group of characters. Like I think Critical Role is a good example of this because they've been through their campaigns, they've been moving their timeline forward, and to some degree, those characters have some relations to the previous parties in some very roundabout ways, and some a little bit more direct ways. That's just not by blood, and it largely works
For the most part.
mostly. I'm not gonna make my complaint about the one complaint I have
Yep.
about that.
Um, but at the end of the day, I think, golden rule, don't be a dick.
True.
Uh, this is a collaborative process. It's meant to be fun. If
God,
everyone's not
if I
having
ever have a
fun, you're
game
having a
room,
problem.
if I ever have a game room,
Oh man, I my
plaque
game
over the door, don't be a dick.
yeah, my entire game was like, Brandon, why do you have all this terrain? Cause I can, and none of you can stop me. We're playing a theater of the mind game. Why is all this stuff? Cause I can, and you can't stop me.
Dude, if you're gonna have a whole fucking board of terrain and shit, I have to be a player. I need that experience in my life.
One of these days.
Would
But
be nice. Would
it
be
would be.
nice.
But that's all I have. You got anything
I
else to
think
add on?
I think we did the thing.
I think we did the thing.
Yeah.
Again, these are general rules. Your table might want something more specific. Uh, like if everyone's playing joke characters, if someone decides to play that they want to play, uh, the Mark Montana, the adventurer with a whip, who is about preserving history, you can, as long as you understand that everyone is all right with that concept, and there's only so much mileage that that concept is going to have. But again, if it's a beer and pretzels game, or if you're like, I don't give a shit, he'll die, he'll be funny. He'll die via boulder too. I'll make it happen. Well, you do you. Pop off.
Montana needs to wear a cowboy hat. He needs to use a whip that's not a bullwhip. I'm pretty sure it's a bullwhip that
Yeah.
Indiana Jones uses. So he needs to use a whip that is not that. Um, and you know what? Because he's wearing a cowboy hat, and like the jacket needs to be different. I feel it needs to be like maybe like a denim jacket. I think like
A
need to
denim
maximize off-brand Indiana Jones as much as possible.
Indiana Jones from Timu.
Yes,
God. Oh, how does that company
that's fucking
function?
great.
Yeah.
People want to buy things for cheap, and unfortunately, total sidebar. I worked with somebody who bought things off of places like that. Literally, like, bought things off of like Wish.com, and it's like literally just the kind of person who is like, it would be nice to have this thing, but I don't have a lot of money, so I'm just gonna go buy this really bad version of the thing. Which I understand if your choices are limited, you might have to make choices. But at the same time, it's like I don't know, it's strange to me because I'm just like, I've always been in the mindset of, sure, it might be a little bit more expensive, but as long as you're making an educated purchasing decision, it can be worth it to buy the more expensive product
Yeah,
because it will hold up better and everything. And also, like, it's not a secret that like Temu and like Wish.com and shit is like filled with like total scam products that are actual just garbage.
yeah, just recycled garbage.
So like I don't know if it's like because there's just enough cases of like the thing being passable, if not just okay, and just creating this sort of like feedback loop in the same way that gambling does. Well, eventually something has to be a good product, right?
Eventually,
If I just keep buying things, I'll get my guaranteed drop. That's it. Wish and Timu is gotcha. That's what
it's
it is.
gotcha. It's gotcha.
Yeah,
Amazon.
it's
All
gotcha
right.
all the way down. We cracked it.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. We hope to have you on the next one. Remember to stay safe out there and feel free to
Don't be a dick.
yeah, don't be a dick. Bye.
Bye bye.